Namasarvebhyah. Yes, this is exactly the video many of you were waiting for. I have finally published my critique on the PhD thesis of Dr. Rishi Raj Popat, and this is a non emotional, purely academic, and a completely balanced analysis. The link to access this entire critique is in the description of this video. It is also appearing on the screen here. In this video, I'm simply going to state the most important parts of this document. But before I start, it goes without saying that the entire analysis is based on my limited understanding of this tradition, and I may please be excused if I have missed out noticing some parts either in the thesis or in the tradition. I am happy to fix all the errors that might have creeped in my document. Now, for the record, I would also like to state that I do not support, believe, or encourage any statements like 2005-year-old mystery solved or Katyayana chose wrong interpretation and so on. This is not a competition between the modern academia and our divine tradition. Instead, we must bring the two together to take the Shastra to the newer heights. For whatever is worth, the claim that Cambridge students solved a 2500-year-old mystery is a fake, it's baseless, and it only shows the immaturity of the people involved therein. I sincerely wish Dr. Rishi was more careful with his words in the media interactions and was extra cautious while talking about the tradition, which is deeply respected by millions of Sanskrit lovers, including myself. Now, having said that, I also must comment on some of the very emotional reactions that have been floating over the internet. While I can understand the mental state, I also want to emphasize that our divine tradition of this 2500 plus years is not so fragile that anybody can go to media and overturn it in one night. If we become angry and emotional at this news, it only shows that we are ourselves insecure about our tradition, which is worse than a newcomer criticizing it. Not just that, but trying to do the khandanas which are floating all over the internet without reading the thesis properly indicates that we are ourselves going against the tradition. I need not tell this newly that our tradition deeply respects the Purva Paksha and it has spent immense time in understanding the Purva Paksha before trying to refute it. Therefore, the need of the hour is to stay calm and do a serious academic evaluation instead of personal attacks. And that's exactly what I've done in my critique, which I'm going to discuss right now. By the way, I also must mention that in spite of all this turmoil, there is a definite positive outcome here. This particular event has made our Shastra tradition, and in particular Panini and his Ashtadhyayi, suddenly popular in the masses. And this is the first time a layman has started thinking about Sanskrit and its deep tradition. And this is precisely the first step towards attracting the newer talent to our field. As someone who has created and maintained ashtadhyayi.com, I can certify that the number of hits on the website increased 300% in the last few days just because of this media outbreak. This is the power of the media. This is the power of the news. And we are better off using it for advancement of the Shastra rather than doing personal attacks. Anyway, enough for the philosophy. Let's come to the core topic. First, let me quickly summarize Dr. Rishi's solution in 5 points, especially for those who have not yet got a chance to read the full thesis. First, Dr. Rishi defines something called as SSRI, single step rule interaction, which is basically two or more rules applicable at the same step in a prakriya. This SSRI is of two types. DOI, which means two rules are applicable on two different components. For example, in Rama plus Bhisa, there is one rule applicable on Bhisa and other rule applicable on Rama. So this is DOI. On the other hand, if two rules are applicable on the same component, it is called SOI. Dr. Rishi proposes that DOI should be resolved by picking the right side operation, and that's how he interprets the word per in his thesis. On the other hand, Dr. Rishi makes it clear that SOI must be resolved with more specific operation, and he has laid out certain heuristics. Towards the later part of the thesis, in chapters 4 and 5, Dr. Rishi also reinterprets some of the very crucial sutras of Ashtadhyayi, Yasmat Pratyay Vidhistadadi Pratyayengam, Angasya, and Asiddhavadatrabhat. Then he says that SOI technique is not subject to any of the Asiddhadhikara, so SOI should be applied before we even start considering Asiddhadhikara. So that was just a quick summary. Now I will be refuting each of these points separately in details with ample actual examples. Please remember, this is an academic discussion. No theory, no trash talk, no philosophy, only examples. But before we jump onto that, I want to summarize my view just to set some stage. First, Dr. Rishi's new interpretation of the para word and his algorithm of selecting the rightmost operand is phenomenal, and even though it has only limited accuracy, it has some potential for the further research. Of course, it needs to be significantly molded, and it needs exhaustive testing at least on 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 forms before we can actually call it sound. I'm soon going to enumerate few cases where his DOI does not work and will need a reshaping of some type. Second, Dr. Rishi has clarified that unlike his DOI, his treatment on SOI is not based on Panini's system, and Panini does not give any rules for SOI. Not just that, the number of SOI examples in the thesis are very few, and I'm soon going to show that SOI fails for a very important type of prakriya. Therefore, it is not immediately clear to me why SOI technique is better than the traditional technique which has been tested over the last 1,000+ years. Third, in many examples, Dr. Rishi gives his approach and then he gives his understanding of how the tradition would track that problem. Unfortunately, Dr. Rishi's understanding of the tradition is pretty weak in these places. Sometimes he quotes wrong sutras, sometimes he quotes wrong pathways, and sometimes he totally misunderstands some aspects in the commentaries. Of course, none of these are directly going to change his discovery, but it would have been much better if Dr. Rishi would have spent some more time in learning and understanding our tradition before proposing something outside its framework. Fourth, Dr. Rishi has interpreted some sutras, especially the Asiddhavadatrabhat or Vasvegachadghasam, in his own way. Completely flawed interpretations. I'm going to point them out in this video later on. Now, having said all this, it cannot be denied that this thesis enumerates some brilliant techniques and is worthy of further investigation. While this discovery has its own shortcomings and loopholes, the way in which the whole topic of Badhya Badaka Bhava has been approached in this thesis definitely opens up newer doors for further research in Paninian grammar. Okay, now on to the technical stuff. First, the cases where DOI does not work. What I'm going to do is, instead of giving individual examples, I'm going to enumerate various patterns where DOI does not work. Each pattern will have many more examples that you yourself can work out. Kindly note, my goal here is only to show that DOI technique is not as error-free as it was advertised. It needs further significant refinement. It should be noted that merely having these examples might not invalidate the technique in general. Instead, the right way here is to find out what percentage of prakriyas cannot be resolved using DOI and then refine the technique to reduce that false positives or negatives. Okay, the first pattern where DOI does not work. Any place where a su pratyaya is attached to the halanta word, but the final form results in a visarga, is unlikely to work because under the DOI technique, su will be removed using halgyabhyo dirghasutisya pruktam hal. For example, the prathama ekvachan of pullinga tad sarvanam, which gives the form as saha, in DOI system, there will be a conflict, a unidirectional conflict between tyadadi namaha and halkabhyo dirghasutisya pruktam hal. And using the right hand side rule, we are forced to remove the su pratyaya using halgyabhyo dirghasutisya pruktam hal, which means rutva and visarga are not possible. Please note, pratyaya lope pratyaya lakshanam cannot bring back the pratyaya. It can only do the pratyaya lakshana karya. Therefore, this pattern holds for forms like saha, eshaha, syaha, yaha, kaha, dyauhu, the diva feminine word prathama ekvachan dyauhu, also panthaha, and many other words are not derivable using DOI. Dr. Rishi is completely mute about the concept of Vishaya Saptami, where a certain karya happens in the anticipation of an upcoming pratyaya. The karya typically happens on the LHS operand and it may change the pratyaya that gets attached. For example, Ardha Dhatuke 2435 is a Vishaya Saptami, and hence in case of adding a yakaradi pratyaya to asa, we must first convert asa to bhu by aster bhuhu in anticipation of the yakaradi pratyaya and then apply yata pratyaya using acho yata. However, in the DOI technique, without a look ahead, we will be forced to apply nyata pratyaya by ruhaloranyata, giving an incorrect form. Ample such examples can be found out. Fourth pattern. The sutras in the Karaka Prakaranam, to be precise, are governed under the traditional interpretation of Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. These sutras completely fall apart in the new theory proposed in this thesis. Dr. Rishi has given some explanation for this in his thesis on page 31, but this explanation unfortunately only shows that Dr. Rishi has not learned the Karaka Prakaranam systematically beyond a catchphrase of Karakani Vivakshataha Bhavanti or something like that. There is a lot to say on this topic. Incidentally, I'm also teaching Karaka Prakaranam in parallel in details. Many of you are also watching those videos. So I don't want to indulge into that discussion right now. And there is a reason to it. I want to give a benefit of doubt to Dr. Rishi here. In his thesis on page 219, in the introduction in Appendix A, he clearly says that he has focused only on the Vidhi Sutrani in the thesis, which is itself a significantly broad domain. So we can keep that aside. Anyway, so these are some of the cases where DOI does not work. I'm sure there are many more. I'm sure many of you might have found some of the examples by yourself. Now let's go on the next bullet, the cases where SOI does not work. I'm going to enumerate only one pattern over here. The SOI technique completely fails for the comparison between Sarvadhatuka Ardhadhatuka yoho and Achishnu Dhatu Bhruvang yoho Iyanguangau. In the most trivial example of Bhu plus Shapa plus Ti, there is an SOI between Achishnu Dhatu Bhruvam, which converts U to Uvang, and Sarvadhatuka Ardhadhatuka yoho, which converts U to O. Out of this, Achishnu Dhatu Bhruvam is more specific because it restricts itself to Ajadi Pratyaya and also I Varnanta and U Varnanta Anga, whereas Sarvadhatuka Ardhadhatuka yoho is for all Pratyayas and Iganta Anga. Therefore, SOI will incorrectly pick Achishnu Dhatu Bhruvam, giving a wrong form. It is obvious that this pattern is applicable for many such cases, and there are many such more patterns. Some of you might have also found out some more. Now, by the way, Dr. Rishi quotes in chapter 3 that Trayanam cannot be derived in his system. Ironically, it is actually possible to derive Trayanam in his system, and the derivation is actually very simple. In the starting state of 3 plus am, there is a DOI between Hasvanadhyapo Nuta and Tres Trayaha. Now, contrary to what Dr. Rishi says, this is a non-blocking DOI. I'll soon explain why. You apply the right hand side operation first, do the Nudagama, and you will get 3 plus Nam. At this stage, Trestrayah can still be invoked because of Yadagama Paribhasha, Yadagamas Tadguni Bhutas Tadgrahanena Grihyante. This paribhasha allows us to consider the sagamaka operand nama in all those places where a reference to the anagamaka operand am is made. In fact, Bhashyakara takes up this precise example in the Bhashya of 643 Nami, and Bhashyakara says, Nud ayam am bhaktaha am grahanena grahishyate. This means that Trestrayah can definitely be invoked after doing the Nudagama, giving Trayanam. Of course, I am using Yadagama Paribhasha here. Dr. Rishi might object here that he doesn't want to use that Paribhasha. But then my question would be why he is not using this Paribhasha. It is Laukika Nyaya Siddha. It is not related to Badhya Badhaka framework. It is not like he is rewriting whole Ashtadhyayi. So I don't see a reason why he would have an objection using an independent Paribhasha over here, especially when I'm helping him out in his derivation. Anyway, moving on. Now I would like to share my views on Dr. Rishi's interpretation of the Anga Samnya. Dr. Rishi has come up with a separate interpretation of Yasmat Pratyavidhistadadi Pratyengam and Angasya. My analysis shows that he required this new interpretations for three major reasons, all of which involve certain karyas to be done on the left hand side. First, to apply the vikarana on the left hand side. Second, to do samprasaranam. And third, to do dvitva before the anga karya. In all these three cases, if Dr. Rishi uses the traditional definition of anga, it will force him to do some operation on the right hand side first, possibly causing the erroneous forms. However, Dr. Rishi has said beyond doubt in his thesis that he is unable to support his new interpretation of the Anga Samnya using Panini's rules. Therefore, my recommendation is to stay with the traditional interpretation of the two sutras because the traditional interpretation is in sync with what Panini says, and then try to reshape the DOI or SOI theory to fit the above exceptions. Moving on, I would like to now talk about Dr. Rishi's interpretation of Asiddhavadatrabhat. There are three components to this: Asiddhavat, Atra, and Abhat. Dr. Rishi has commented on all the three. First of all, Dr. Rishi's explanation on Asiddhavat versus Asiddha and the description of why he thinks Panini has added Vati Pratyaya in Asiddhavat. He suggests that Asiddhavat refers to Karya Siddhatva, Asiddha on the hand refers to Shastra Siddhatva, and it perfectly fits the way in which the three adhikaras are considered in the tradition. However, Dr. Rishi also interprets the terms Atra and Abhat in his own style, and now I'm going to quote examples and show beyond doubt that Dr. Rishi's interpretation of these two terms introduces a lot of problems. To start with, in the section 5.2 of the thesis, Dr. Rishi has interpreted the term atra to mean here in this adhikara rather than accepting the traditional interpretation of samanashraya. Further, he also says that he does not accept the concept of samanashraya applicable to this sutra at all. This particular stand is completely incorrect and it causes problems in prakriya like prakathaya. The point to note here is that in the state of pra plus katha plus e plus lyapa, atolopaha will cause akara lopa on katha, giving pra plus kath plus e plus lyapa. Atolopaha is 6448, which is an abhiya karya. At this stage, another abhiya karya 6456 lyapilaghu purvat gets invoked by the tradition, which converts e to aya, finally giving prakathaya. Now here is something interesting to note. Atolopaha and Lyapi Laghu Purvat are both abhiya karyas, but there is no samanashraya, so Lyapi Laghu Purvat can actually see what Atolopaha has done and only then it can act. In other words, because there is no samanashraya, Atolopaha and Lyapi Laghu Purvat are not asiddhavat towards each other. However, if we go by Dr. Rishi's interpretation, then after Atolopaha is applied, Lyapilaghu Purvat will not accept the output of Atolopaha, and unless that output is accepted, Lyapilaghu Purvat cannot be applied further because that Laghu Purva condition cannot be satisfied. Therefore, if we ignore the Samanashraya, you cannot apply Lyapi Laghu Purvat, which is a left operation. After Atolopaha, the right operation is performed, and therefore Dr. Rishi is unable to derive the form Prakathaya with this new interpretation. As a result, we can conclude that the new interpretation of the word Atra in Asiddhavadatrabhat is incorrect. Next, Dr. Rishi also claims that the Abhi Asiddhadhikara ends as soon as the Bhadhikara starts, instead of the traditional method of continuing it till the end of the pada. This is also incorrect, and there is a clear Jnapaka in the Sutra Patha for this. The Upadhayaha word in Surya Tishagatsya Matsyanam Sa Upadhayaha 64149, this particular sutra can be used in the examples like Suryena Ekadik Sa Sauri. The prakriya starts with Surya plus Ana plus Nipa. At this stage, Yasya teacher is applied and the akara of Surya is removed. This akara lopa is now asiddha towards the Surya Tishagatsya Matsyanam Ya Upadhayaha, and hence this sutram will see the Surya with a full yakara with a ya in the Upadha, thereby allowing us to get rid of that ya, giving the final form as Sauri. In Dr. Rishi's system, he will be forced to apply Yasya teacher on the right hand side. Now, Yasya teacher is 64148, which is outside the Abhi Asiddhadhikara as per his new definition. So, the form generated by Yasya teacher will be visible to Surya Tishagatsya Matsyanam Ya Upadhayaha, which means there is ya at the end instead of being at the Upadha, and then you cannot get rid of the ya because Surya Tishagatsya Sutra is no more applicable. The tradition can work through this because the tradition accepts the mutual asiddhatva between Yasya teacher and Surya Tishagatsya, which is only possible if the Abhya Asiddhadhikara goes all the way till end of 6.4. Therefore, Dr. Rishi's explanation of Abhat is also completely wrong. In summary, Dr. Rishi has reinterpreted the three components of the sutra Asiddhavat, Atra and Abhat. I praised him for his explanation of Asiddhavat and have shown that the remaining two interpretations, that is the interpretation of Atra and the interpretation of Abhat, are completely incorrect. Now, in my critique, whose link is available in the description below, I have also commented specifically on 25 different examples taken by Dr. Rishi and provided my feedback on it. I have not refuted these examples directly, but I have shown that Dr. Rishi's understanding of the tradition is wrong for these examples. I don't want to elaborate on all these examples here. Instead, anybody who is interested can definitely open up and read the critique. So let me just close with a few remarks. In this video and also in the critique, I have shown beyond a doubt that Dr. Rishi's approach is far from being sound and accurate. In spite of this, I think that the DOI idea specifically proposed by Dr. Rishi is something that can be explored further. Therefore, if Dr. Rishi or to that matter anyone else wants to continue working on this approach, here are my suggestions. First, please consult the experts and try to refine your definitions of DOI and SOI. Use the wisdom that the tradition has to offer you. Build your solution on the top of the tradition rather than criticizing the tradition without studying it properly. Remember, we have a very rich 2500 plus year old tradition contributed by innumerable scholars. You are better off using it for your own benefit. Second, Please do exhaustive testing, at least for 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 forms. Unless we do such testing, it is not correct to even think that your approach is correct. Fortunately, we have the necessary computational tools and we have the scholars who can build such tools for you. Please reach out to them. Third, do not reinterpret the sutras for no reason. There is a reason why certain interpretation has stayed the test of time for the millennia. And I have shown beyond doubt what happens if you try to reinterpret such a crucial sutram, Asiddhavadatrabhat, based on limited understanding of Ashtadhyayi. Instead, try to pose ideas in such a way that you would be able to build these ideas based on the existing interpretation rather than being forced to use a newer and completely untested interpretation. Finally, I would like to thank Dr. Rishi Raj Popat for reaching out to me personally and requesting me to give feedback on this thesis. It actually means a lot to me. And moreover, such a critique is always a give and take relationship. So it cannot be denied that my own understanding of many concepts became much stronger, because when you have to criticize something, you have to read the literature, vyakhyanas, bhashya, commentary 5 times, 10 times, think about it, understand what they are saying, and so on. So my understanding of many concepts has become stronger after reading the thesis, and I wholeheartedly thank Dr. Rishi Raj Popat for this, and I sincerely wish him all the very best in his future endeavors. ईराक्षरसमाम्नायमधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः.